This is the Lewis LHP U4 brake set, Lewis's newest flagship disc brake and their very first of their third generation lineup. I've been riding these premium Chinese brakes over the past couple of weeks, and they are extremely interesting, both in terms of what they promise to deliver and the price point at which they compete. Today I'm going to cover how these brakes perform on the trail, what sets them apart from their competition, and discuss a safety concern I stumbled upon that I believe needs to be addressed. Let's get into it. In this video, I will be focusing on the performance of Lewis's new LHP U4 brake set specifically, rather than the controversy behind Lewis as a brand. I released a dedicated 40-minute long investigation piece a couple of months ago that covers everything you'd ever need to know about Lewis, including their R&D processes, overarching business plan, and history as a respected fishing reel manufacturer. I would highly recommend watching that video first so that you have all of the information needed to make an informed decision about whether these brakes and this brand are right for you, and avoiding uneducated comments on this video. It's up to you to form your own opinion of Lewis as a brand, so I'll continue to score them at a 5 out of 10 for their controversial perception. After I released my LH4 review video, Lewis reached out to me directly, thanked me for my honest and professional videos about their brakes and their brand, and offered to send me a set of their brand new LHP U4 brakes completely free of charge. Lewis did not ask for anything in return for these brakes. They do not know I am making this video, they have no say in the content of this video, they are not a sponsor of my channel or this video, and I stand to gain nothing financially beyond ad revenue regardless of my conclusion today. And I didn't sign anything either. I understand that Lewis was gambling on the fact that I was very likely going to make a dedicated video about these new brakes, and clearly they were correct, and I respect that Lewis is willing to send me a pair when they know that my video will not be all sunshine and rainbows. But I pride myself on creating honest and independent review content, and I believe it was ethical to accept these brakes as it provided me early access to a brand new product that is relevant to my audience, and I have publicly demonstrated an ability to be critical of Lewis's decisions when I believe it is justified, a trend that will absolutely continue into this video. I will be either keeping or selling these brakes after I have concluded my testing and comparisons. So what is the LHP U4 brake set anyways, and how does it fit into Lewis's lineup? These are Lewis's newest flagship brakes, which were launched in China on July 11th, 2024 and internationally on November 2nd. The LHP U4 is a 4-piston mineral oil disc brake designed for downhill, enduro, and all-mountain usage. Lewis has also released an LHP-S4 brake set at the same time that is confusingly marketed for the exact same intended use. LHP refers to the lever design and U4 or S4 refer to the caliper design. The U4 calipers have 4 17mm pistons, and the S4 calipers have 2 14mm and 2 17mm pistons, and both share identical LHP levers when you purchase a complete brake set. I'll talk a little bit about the S4 brake set later in this video, but from now on when I say LHP, I mean LHP U4 as that is my focus today. These LHP brakes are currently available in 2 colors, black or silver, though Lewis has mentioned that they will be adding additional colors in the future as they ramp up production of this new model. Lewis has teased a few of these colorways on their Bilibili account and made them available for purchase within their domestic Chinese market. The LHP U4 brake set retails for 439 amendments, which is approximately 615 Canadian or 416 euros. This positions these brakes as a mid-level third-party option, $5 cheaper than the MSRP on Shimano XT M8120 brakes, or roughly equally between SRAM's bronze and silver, Mavens, or Code Stealths. Despite their lower price point, however, Lewis believes that these brakes have the performance to take on the best of the best, something that we will definitely be covering in detail in my next brake-related video. The LHP brake sets are exciting in the way that they represent Lewis's first third-generation brake offering. Lewis's first-generation brake, the Takisawa, appeared to be a direct clone of the trick-stuffed 𝙎𝙬 and was allegedly only provided to riders within China for the purposes of fast-tracking research and development, rather than turning a profit. Lewis's second-generation brakes were the ones that brought the brand attention on an international scale. For 4-piston models, this includes the LHT, LH4, and LV4 models. Although clearly still derived from Trickstuff's offerings with their striking visual similarities, Lewis believed that their list of claimed improvements made to the 𝙎𝙬 and Maxima models constituted a significant enough change to those products for Lewis to proudly call these brakes their own. Feel free to pause this video to refresh yourself on this detailed list of changes. The LHP is Lewis's first third-generation brake, which I mentioned in my LH4 review that I was excited to see, since each successive generation should see a higher percentage of unique intellectual property. I wish that Lewis put in more effort here to visually differentiate their industrial design in order to distance themselves from their controversial past though. They teased a unique aesthetic for these third-generation brakes several months ago on their Bilibili account, and I believe that this direction would have helped them gain more respect in the community as an independent manufacturer among those who don't believe that this is a Robin Hood-style moment in the industry. As it stands, the LHP brakes remain a form of product clickbait, relying on their similarities similarities rather than their differences as a form of free marketing, one that I am confident was a conscious business decision. Lewis has also informed me that they plan to continue selling both their second and third generation brakes at the same time, and letting the market decide which one ends up being successful. It's worth noting that I could still find no mention of any sort of warranty on Lewis's official English website for any of their models. On Bilibili, they mentioned that all of their brakes come with a lifetime warranty within China and a 1-year warranty in foreign countries, but it would be nice to see this formally stated through a written policy on their website. Buying a new product from any company is a risk that you accept as an early adopter. But let's talk about what's inside and what sets these brakes apart from Lewis's second generation of brakes. Lewis claims that they have made 3 noteworthy improvements with these new brakes. The first is that the LHP levers feature an upgraded leverage ratio adjustment system. We will discuss this feature in detail later in the video. The second is that the U4 and S4 calipers feature independent cooling fins for better heat dissipation performance. This is a relatively rare feature within the industry, and I believe that their implementation of this feature is also unique. The brakes arrive with 2 cooling fins held captive within the assembled caliper with a solid plate of material ready to contact the entire rear surface of the brake pad. These fins appear to be not removable without disassembling the 2 halves of the brake caliper and rebleeding the entire system, which I would not expect a consumer to do, and it is unclear whether or not the pistons would then fall out of the caliper with them having to sit the thickness of these plates further toward the rotor. I took classes in both heat transfer and thermodynamics in university, and although truthfully it has been a while, I am unwilling to comment on how effective this design would be at cooling the system without performing some quantitative testing. My intuition suggests that the fins that lie outside of the caliper are thicker than I would expect for a cooling fin, and the overwhelming majority of riders are not thermally loading their brakes in such a way that would necessitate having a dedicated solution like this. For someone at my weight, this feels like more of a marketing and aesthetics decision, though the heaviest riders on the steepest trails may see a tangible performance benefit. The third change is to the bore of the master cylinder. The LHP features a dual diameter bore, which Lewis claims helps to enhance the durability of the system, along with softening the bite point through the initial portion of the lever stroke for improved modulation. I don't have significant experience with their LHT model, which would be the most direct comparison to the LHP here, but I will be testing out the LHD model shortly. Setting up these LHP brakes was very straightforward. There are no interference concerns with ring clamp shifters from either of the major drivetrain brands, and Lewis offers direct mount adapters for SRAM Matchmaker or Shimano iSpec 1 or 2 shifters, but unfortunately not the most recent iSpec EV standard that has been relevant for the past several years. Lewis sent me a British version of these brakes that required me to swap over the levers and calipers into their correct pairings for North American riders. Thankfully, this was a very easy process. Lewis has an anti-leak oil system for these brakes, which is effectively a proprietary reusable fitting connected to the end of the brake hose that allows you to easily connect and disconnect it as desired without losing any mineral oil in the process. This feature works as advertised, and after swapping the hoses between the levers, I had to add no additional fluid to the system. It's always nice to have a reusable design wherever possible. The front hose was already the correct length, and I chose not to turn the rear hose any shorter as I am uncertain on whether I am going to keep these brakes in the future. This means that I ran the factory bleed and encountered no issues related to it. Lewis recommends bleeding the brake with the bite point adjustment wound all the way out, something that I assumed they did before packaging, and I found that winding it all the way in provided an adequate bite point location with the lever throw. Since I did not have to bleed these brakes, I cannot comment on the complexity or consistency of that process, although it does appear to be very similar to Lewis's previous brake sets. Inbi had no issues getting a solid bleed on my LH4 brake set on their very first attempt, without having any experience with Lewis brakes before, although there are many people online who suggest that this process may be more finicky and less consistent than average. I suggest following Lewis's official videos on their YouTube channel to the letter, and hopefully you'll have a similar positive experience to us. Lewis does not specify a specific brand or grade of mineral oil, so it can be assumed that all bicycle-related mineral oils are compatible with this brake set. The LHPs include Lewis-branded brake pads that are based on the Hope V4 brake pad standard, the same as the Trickstuff Maximas. Although not nearly as common as SRAM's Code or Shimano's 4-piston standard, the Hope V4 standard is decently well supported and offered by a number of third-party brake manufacturers. Lewis does not mention this compatibility on their website, however, preferring that you'd purchase OEM pads directly from them, and I bet that you'll never see this compatibility listed on Trickstuff's brake pad pages either. Unfortunately, the LHPs also have a side-specific lever design, so you'll have to purchase a left or right lever specifically in the event of a crash or other damage, which also does not appear to be available for purchase outside of a complete brake set, so you'll have to reach out directly. I'm going to score these LHPs at a 6 out of 10 in the serviceability category due to the general consensus online that Lewis's brakes are harder than average to bleed correctly, and service and warranty parts availability remains largely unknown and highly region dependent. If Lewis demonstrates an ability to provide adequate warranty and customer service, I will raise this score in the future. Throughout my setup process, I discovered 2 potential concerns that I wanted to pay close attention to on the trail. My first concern was that the cooling fins would rattle against the caliper. When these brakes arrived with bleed blocks installed, you will understand why I was concerned. But sure enough, once we installed the brake pads into the caliper, the rattling completely disappeared. The reason for this appears to be that Lewis has spec'd the burliest brake pad spring that I have ever seen. The spring is gigantic compared to the standard Shimano one that I had on hand, both visually and in shock factor, and it provides enough spreading force that it's difficult to close the pads evenly by hand. These initial tests are not necessarily representative of real-world testing though, so I'll be paying close attention to cooling fin rattling noises and uneven pad wear later. In order to keep my testing as fair as possible for my upcoming comparison, I took the known good brake pads and rotors from the Trickstuff Maximas that I most recently tested, and I installed them into the LHP's calipers with Lewis's beefy brake pad spring and pad retaining bolt. This will help ensure that any differences in performance between the brakes are due to fundamental designs of the brake sets themselves, and controlling variables like this makes for the best science too. In addition to these new concerns, I wanted to validate that the issues I encountered with my LH4 brake set are not present with these LHP brakes. I had 3 issues with my LH4 brake set that are worth reviewing quickly. The first is that the lever clamp provided an insufficient amount of clamping force at its specified torque, and it would occasionally rotate around my handlebar when subject to a moderate perpendicular load or an exceptionally hard braking force on very steep trails. This was not a safety concern given that it occurred relatively infrequently, but something that could be representative of a broader product quality concern. The second is that one of my reach adjustment dials was extremely stiff, to the point where it was significantly more comfortable to rotate and adjust using a set of pliers. There is a set screw positioned coaxially inside the bearing that connects the reach adjustment dial to the master cylinder piston rod, which is specifically for adjusting the amount of tension on the reach adjustment dial, making it feel stiffer or looser. I believe that my brakes had a manufacturing defect or a particularly rough thread, as this set screw did not affect the amount of torque required to adjust the reach on my brakes. And the third is that the brake pads in my LH4s rattled against the caliper body while riding down rough trails. This was annoying and something that I will be paying close attention to independently of the potential cooling fin rattle discussed previously. My first impressions of these brakes were very positive. Despite being able to tell where the inspiration came from, these LHPs are still fantastic looking brakes, and they have the build quality to match. The quality of the machining is fantastic overall, with no imperfections or sloppy CNC work to speak of. To nobody's surprise, I'm usually a fan of bolder and brighter colors, because riding should be fun after all, but the sleek silver aesthetic grew on me throughout my testing. Aesthetics are always a personal preference, but everyone who saw these brakes on the trail commented positively on how they looked, so I'm going to score them at an 8 out of 10 in this category, brought up by the promise of future colorways being available globally. But now let's talk about what's inside, and discuss a pretty major safety concern that I stumbled upon throughout my testing. The LHPs and previously LHTs offer a class-leading 3 mostly independent adjustments that you can tinker with trailside. Behind the lever lies a standard toolless reach adjustment dial that is nothing special on first glance, but provides a range of adjustments so large that either extreme is practically unusable. No matter how big or small your hands are, or how far inboard or outboard you prefer your lever to sit, you will always be able to find your desired setting within this window. Hidden coaxially within the piston rod, which this reach adjustment dial is mounted to, lies Lewis's bite point adjustment screw. This small 2mm set screw allows you to adjust the bite point of these brakes, which is the length of the lever's dead stroke before pad contact is made. Lewis provides a small thumb screw with a 2mm hex head in the box with these brakes that you'll probably lose on the trail eventually. I always enjoy having the shortest dead stroke possible, so I wound this adjustment all the way in and found it to provide a relatively average but very usable dead stroke travel distance. The range of adjustments possible with this bite point adjustment screw is very impressive, and it is a great way to combat less than ideal bleeds, likely producing very usable results regardless. All 4 of these bite point and reach adjustments were very smooth and required minimal force to operate, a sign of potentially improved quality control since my LH4 brake set. The third adjustment is by far the most unique, with few other brands offering anything comparable in the brake space, and that is the leverage ratio adjustment. Lewis claims that this LHP lever adopts a newly upgraded leverage ratio adjustment system, which has a better adjustment experience, presumably in comparison to their previous LHT brake. In simple terms, the dial on the outside of the lever blade is connected to a worm gear within the lever assembly and allows you to change the kinematics of your lever to adjust the performance characteristics of your brake set. Although these kinematic changes appear to be quite minor at first, the effects that they have on the feel of the brake are surprisingly significant on the trail. Adjusting this leverage ratio dial directly impacts how soft or firm the initial bite point feels, along with how quickly the power ramps up throughout the stroke. I'll talk about this a little bit more in detail later on, but being able to adjust how your brakes feel to this extent is an awesome feature that provides a tangible benefit to the rider, allowing them to set up their brakes exactly to their preferences, including differently between front and rear. There's no denying these benefits, but Lewis's implementation here leaves something to be desired. At first glance, it appears that the LHP's leverage ratio adjustment has a toolless operation, sporting a shiny machined adjustment dial that just begs you to turn it. Lewis has even collaborated with dealers on social media that perpetuate this misconception by uploading videos that show only the toolless portion of its operation. This is a bit misleading because it is not a toolless adjustment at all. This dial is locked into place by two tiny set screws located around the corner of the lever blade toward the main lever body. Without these 1.5mm set screws, the leverage ratio adjustment dial would presumably spin into its lowest energy position while riding down the trail. Unfortunately, these 1.5mm hex screws are not the easiest to access. With the lever's reach adjusted to my desired riding position, I have to depress the lever blade slightly with one hand in order to access these set screws with the other. I also had to try 3 different hex keys to loosen the factory torque on these screws because they began to strip out with my 2 average quality ones. I don't own a multi-tool with a 1.5mm hex on it, not that the body of such a tool would be guaranteed to fit anyways, being so close to the reservoir either, so I had to risk impalement and loosely carry along my nicest 1.5mm hex key throughout my testing period. Lewis mentions these set screws clearly on their LHP product page, and it isn't the biggest deal since this leverage ratio adjustment will likely be a set and forget it thing for the majority of riders out there. But I find that claiming the LHPs have a better adjustment experience to their LHTs to be quite a bit of a stretch. The LHTs feature a very similar leverage ratio kinematic adjustment, but with a much more enjoyable implementation for trail side changes. The LHT has a single 2.5mm hex head screw, although mine has a D10, that locks the adjustment in place, a size that you are much more likely to find present on a multi-tool that you already own. Once loosened, you can very quickly and precisely cycle through the range of possible kinematics with the knurled adjuster on the underside of the lever. This design is significantly faster and more convenient to adjust on the trail through the use of a single screw with a common hex size that doesn't require you to depress the lever, and also provides significantly more repeatability due to the anodized markings on both the main bolt and lever body. It isn't clear what these white markings actually represent in terms of performance, but it is easy to remember where the white dot on the bolt lies relative to the fancy pattern, providing excellent repeatability. The LHPs have no anodization or markings whatsoever. Unless you plan on meticulously counting exactly how many clicks you, your friends, and everyone who tries these brakes moves in either direction from the moment you install them, I'd recommend marking the bolt with a dot and remembering where it lies in relation to the reservoir. This will provide you some level of repeatability with your brakes, but no ability to compare settings with your friends, as your dot will likely be in a different position to theirs. Throughout my ride testing, I adjusted this leverage ratio dial between the 4 easiest to describe positions relative to the handlebar: lever blade close, lever blade far, reach adjuster close, and reach adjuster far. Although I could try to understand the kinematics at play here, I decided it would be more fun to test my unbiased perception out on the trail. In the lever blade close position, the LHPs seem to provide a soft but consistent bite point and a more gradual ramp up in power than I was expecting or prefer, similar to a more powerful and lighter lever action SRAM code. In this position, the brakes were completely usable, but not how I prefer a brake to perform. In the reach adjuster close position, the LHPs seem to provide a more progressive ramp up in power and a medium level of bite point firmness, similar to a heavier lever action 𝙎𝙬𝙬 A4. In this position, the brake's performance was very good overall, although I would prefer a sharper bite point. In the lever blade far position, the LHPs provided a very well-defined firm bite point and an impressive ramp up in power. Unsurprisingly, this setting felt very similar to the Trickstuff Maxima and is definitely the setting that I preferred the most, since minimizing input force at the lever results in reduced rider fatigue, allowing you to ride stronger, faster, and longer. The deadstroke lever force in any position remained unchanged, and was very comparable to that of the Trickstuff Maxima, which I found to be one of the least fatiguing designs that I have ever ridden. I wish that it was slightly lighter like the 𝙎𝙬𝙬𝙬s or Intent Trinities, but I would have no issues using the LHPs as my primary brake in this lever blade far position. The wow factor is real here, and these brakes earn a solid 8 out of 10 in this category, solely based on their performance rather than their reputation. In the reach adjuster far position, I immediately encountered a safety issue with these brakes. When a heavy but not extreme amount of force was applied to the lever blade would contact the reach adjustment dial instead of pulling straight to the handlebar. This interference effectively bottoms out the kinematics of the lever and prevents you from slowing down as quickly as possible. I'm surprised that an oversight like this made it to production, and it appears that the designer either forgot to check their assembly for interferences in every possible configuration, or they consciously decided that it was unlikely to be an issue, and that riders who encountered this problem would be smart enough to solve it themselves. Safety is my #1 priority, so neither of these answers are acceptable to me. Imagine if a car was sold with an adjustable brake pedal design, and the range of adjustment present allowed you to accidentally limit the maximum amount of braking power available by bottoming out the brake pedal against a hard stop. This car would be recalled immediately worldwide, and the issue would be resolved before it was allowed back on public roads. Now, I'm not suggesting that a formal recall is necessarily in order here, but I believe that it is Lewis's duty to inform customers of this potential issue by every means possible. This includes updating all of the product pages on their website, the adjustment videos on their social media channels, bleeding and assembly documentation, including physical warning stickers or notes in the box, and a service bulletin to reach existing customers. I also realized that the LHTs feature a very similar adjustment design, so I decided to see if it had the same interference problem as the LHP, and it turns out that it does. It was a little harder to get this interference condition because I believe that Nick may have slightly overfilled his brakes when he bled them, but it was still absolutely possible with the LHT. Amazingly, I could not find a single mention of this issue anywhere online, on Lewis's pages or other forums, but that doesn't mean that it isn't an issue. I also encountered another issue with the LHP's leverage system. On two of my rides, despite torquing both set screws on both levers to a degree that I was concerned about stripping them, given their tiny 1.5mm hex size and the majority of my 1.5mm hexes not fitting, they managed to quickly loosen and one of the levers developed a significant amount of distracting play. This play was clearly evident in two axes of the lever blade and one axis of the piston rod. I don't believe that this play is inherently a safety issue or representative of a sloppy build quality, since it was quickly remedied with the correct Allen key at home afterwards, but I am concerned that the leverage ratio adjustment setting could drift over time when it is not clamped down by the set screws, and this could eventually create the dangerous interference condition. I do not feel comfortable tightening these set screws any more than I already did given their delicate design, and I will also not be purchasing a torque wrench that has a 1.5mm hex to carry on my rides, as that is not a reasonable expectation here. I really like this leverage ratio adjustment feature. I think that it adds significant value to both the LHP and LHT models, and I wish that more manufacturers incorporated this level of adjustability into their brakes. I'm going to score the LHPs at an 8 out of 10 for their innovative adjustability, but I hate to imagine a scenario where someone sets up their brake in a way that this interference could occur, tests it out in shallower terrain initially without encountering any issues, and then moves on to steeper terrain where safety is absolutely critical and where they are more likely to interfere. Again, safety has been and always will be my number one priority here, and I have justified my safety concerns with this design. Let's move on. On the trail, these LHP brakes are fantastic performers, especially in my preferred lever blade far leverage ratio adjustment position. They do not have the lightest lever action around, but they have more than enough power to make up for it, and I struggle to imagine a rider that these brakes would not stop. The power comes on very intuitively, with a well-defined bite point and a good low-end modulation for brake-specific trail features. These brakes have a very solid, well-built feel to them, with no perceptible play in any parts of the lever. These brakes remained perfectly consistent throughout my testing, which occurred across a range of temperatures, including a few degrees below freezing, and I never felt the need to touch the factory bleed despite swapping the levers myself. The bite point never wandered, they never faded or pumped up, even on sustained descents over 300 meters or 1,000 freedoms high. I also stored them in vertical orientations for days at a time without any negative effects. They just worked, and they worked very well every time. My concerns about rattling noises from both the cooling fins and the brake pads also turned out to be unfounded, and I did not notice any distracting noises coming from the calipers even on some relatively fast and rough trails. The redesigned 2-bolt lever clamp also never rotated on my handlebars at approximately their prescribed torque. My biggest performance-related gripe is that Lewis has stuck with a very smooth lever blade surface finish with this new model. This makes the lever slipperier than necessary when riding in wet, cold, or sweaty conditions, and a little extra grip through design or manufacturing would go a long way toward giving the LHPs a more premium feel. I know that Lewis has tested dimpled lever blades in the past, and I hope that this is something that they implement with a running change in the future. Now, before we get into the rest of my scores, I'd like to briefly touch on that LHP-S4 variant again. The only difference between the S4 and the U4 model appears to be the size of 2 of the 4 pistons and the pad standard that has been chosen, as they both use the exact same LHP lever. The S4 is only $20 cheaper and 22 grams lighter for the set, and likely offers power equivalent to Lewis's existing LH4 brake set, albeit this time with a leverage ratio adjustment option. The confusing part is that the S4 also has this new captive independent cooling fin design. I struggle to imagine a customer who would make use of these cooling fins and not want to upgrade to the more powerful U4 model. There's so much overlap between the intended use of these two brakes that it doesn't make business sense to me for Lewis to offer both models, and Lewis themselves list the exact same downhill, enduro, and all-mountain intended uses. If you want less power, you probably also don't want heavy cooling fins, and you could probably find your desired lever feel using the LHP levers adjustments and the U4 caliper caliper. The weight difference is also insignificant, so I'd blanketly recommend avoiding the S4 variant. The Hope V4 and E4 models come to mind as a similar product separation, though the V4s have the additional benefit of being able to run Hope's Mad Scientist 3.3mm vented rotors, which is likely enough of a product separation to make stocking and distributing separate SKUs worthwhile. Now, in terms of overall performance, these LHP U4s are somewhat unsurprisingly extremely similar to the most recent brake that I tested, the Trickstuff Maxima, and they deserve the same performance score, earning a stellar 9 out of 10 in this category, which is tied for the second highest that I've ever awarded. In terms of invisibility, I would also give them the same score as the Maximas, if not for my valid safety concerns about the LHP's leverage ratio adjustment feature. It's not a problem until it is, but even knowing that this was a potential issue, I found myself sometimes forgetting to double check for the interference when adjusting things in a hurry or while having a conversation on the trail. I'm going to give the LHPs a 6 out of 10 in this category. This will increase to a 7 out of 10 with proactive messaging from Lewis about this issue, and a 9 out of 10 with a revision to future product runs that eliminate this potential interference entirely. In terms of versatility, these brakes have more than enough power to be a worthy choice for even the most aggressive of downhill runs, but they also wouldn't be out of place on an enduro or even trail bike either. The fact that you can adjust the lever's kinematics to suit your intended use is a big bonus. However, the independent cooling fins appear to be captive to the caliper and not easy to remove, if it's even possible at all, and reduce the versatility score a bit here. I doubt you'll see fin brakes show up on XC bikes anytime soon, and in reality I'd argue that most riders in general won't see a functional benefit to the inclusion, so I'll score these brakes at a 7 out of 10 for their versatility. There are better options available for the shorter travel end of the spectrum, including from Lewis themselves. It's impossible to assess the long-term reliability of any component after just a few weeks of riding with it, but I'm going to score the LHPs at a 7 out of 10 here, since I don't expect anything drastically different here than Lewis's current lineup, which has had mostly positive reliability and durability sentiment online. And finally, we have value. Simply put, these are the best value brakes available at this price point. The build quality is fantastic, the range of adjustments is almost unmatched, and the performance is truly up there with the best, all at a price that is slightly below Shimano XT or SRAM Silver Mavens. The LHPs are incredibly well-rounded brakes, and I imagine that most riders will be able to get along with them nicely with some tinkering. They earn a 9 out of 10 for their incredible value proposition, assuming you are willing to overlook the controversy and stigma surrounding their existence. Add them all up, and the total is 73 out of 100, which places them here amongst other brakes that I've reviewed so far, some without dedicated videos. The most obvious comparison here is against the Trickstuff Maxima, and it's such an important comparison that I will be releasing a dedicated video comparing the LHPs against the Maximas before Christmas. The next most obvious comparison is against the 𝙎𝙬𝙬 A4s. Both brakes are excellent performers on the trail, and I do enjoy a good purple ano, but the LHP offers more creature comforts in a slightly cheaper mineral oil package. The biggest difference between the two is the build quality, with the 𝙎𝙬s appearing to be quite cheaply manufactured, and the LHPs having a premium appearance with a carefully CNC'd design. I prefer the LHPs to anything that SRAM or Shimano have to offer at any price point. They also have more power than the TRPs, and I am keen to see how they stack up against Hope Tech 4 V4s in the future. The LHP is the 4th Lewis brake that I've parking lot tested, including their LH4, LV4, and LHT model, and I believe that it strikes the best value of price to performance within their 4-piston lineup. I still prefer their LHT model in theory, with a more convenient and repeatable leverage ratio adjustment feature and lack of mandatory cooling fins, but it is 50 freedoms more expensive, and I am hesitant to recommend either to my audience until Lewis addresses my interference concerns. But there is no denying that the LHP is a fantastic option, and I'll always encourage you to make an informed decision and vote with your money.